Is there a way out? Can I change my brain? Am I just a victim to who I am? I'm your host, Steve Sisler. Stay tuned for another episode of Behavioral Insights.
Coming up, an interview with American artist John Bukaty. John has attention deficit hyperactive disorder. He's been through unimaginable circumstances in points in his life, but he's risen above it all, and he's become an amazing stage artist. And I go into his profile a little bit, but mostly I let John share his story. My hope is that you'll really enjoy this story and think about your own self and where you are in the world and where you want to be, because John is really a poster child for overcoming all odds. Okay, so I'm here with a friend that I met at an event, and John was one of the speakers at the event. But he did some amazing things. Number one, he's an incredible artist, and he, I think it was to music, and he did some artwork, and at the same time, I think he talked a little bit about his story. And everybody got to take home some artwork, and it was really great. So I profiled John after the event and got to know him. And it's been great getting to know John. And John is what I call a true artist, which means he's artsy as a person. He doesn't just do art. So John, welcome to the Behavioral Insights podcast. It's really great to have you on.
Steve, thank you so much for having me. It's just been it's been awesome ever since I met you. Getting to know you and your friendship's meaningful, man.
Okay. So I want to get started by just you telling the listeners a little bit about yourself, how you got into, when you realized you were an artist, and then how you got into the business that you're in.
Oh man, I people ask me a lot when I got into art. How did you know I was an artist? I think when I was like 2 to 3 years old, I actually really remember looking at marble on the floor in the front of our house and just really analyzing it. So there was a hyper focus there, studying patterns, I think, visually. Oh man, and when I was, a really young kid, I watched a ton of MTV, and visually that was so connected to the music. I think being super ADD, that really connected like all the, neurotransmitters. Everything was clicking on all cylinders when I was 2 feet from the TV at about 8 years old. And then high school, I just started taking classes. I mean, I was always drawing in every class because everything was super boring to me, unless the teacher was enthusiastic. My dad was really enthusiastic. So like when he taught me something, I listened because I was it was hard to get my attention. So I kind of went through those classes in high school and just got some really basic skills. I mean, good skills from a private high school, that 7 or 8 classes that I probably didn't take, I took for granted. I was a football player in high school, a football player in college. My dad played for the Broncos. Football was kind of a religion around my house. So artwork was a hobby, and I didn't take it very seriously, although I ended up getting a fine art degree in college, kind of on the back burner. So when I got to that, pretty much, tells you how much of an artist I was after football. I really wasn't. It was something I did. Then when I went into the business world in Chicago, because that's what you do, you just get a job after college. So I moved to Chicago. I was a sales rep, and it wasn't till 2 years into it, when I burned out in sales, that I went to a trip in Denver and got into, I just, again, it was the music that stimulated me. And then I started kind of using that visual, third eye kind of thing, inner screen. And then I
Mm-hmm.
started kind of seeing ideas again. And I came home and did a painting. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
quit my job shortly after that, and I was making like $100,000 in Chicago at 26, and 2 months later I was selling $10 prints on the lot of a Widespread Panic show. And I was so happy because I was doing what I wanted to do. I was suicidal when I flunked this state insurance test in Chicago, which was like 3 months earlier. So I kind of had a transformation of sorts then, in that whole year. So that was a
Mm.
huge moment in time. And then when I started getting into art as a, full time, it was hard. I was painting kids' rooms. I had moved back to Kansas City. I had left Chicago with my head down, defeated, but I knew I was going to be an artist. And the first couple years were terrible. Started bartending, and one night I told this guy, I said, look, I told the head of the bar, I said, I need to paint with live music. And because every time I was at a live music show, I knew I could paint, like right there.
Mm.
And then I go back to my studio and I had unfinished paintings, So I really had to raise the chaos, raise the vibration, raise the energy level, and get this intensity level that was way beyond the quiet solitude of a artist studio, because I'm extroverted in a way that I feed off people's energy. So that was another
Mm-hmm.
key component to my story, which was in 2001, I started painting live to live music, and that changed everything. I was on the spot. I was super hyper focused from 9 o'clock to midnight. I did a painting to a new band every Thursday night at the 75th Street Brewery in Kansas City. And that kind of
Mm-hmm.
was a birth of almost a character in a sense, because that that also, I mean, I can't lie, there was some hallucinogenics that had started that. I took some mushrooms that kind of, to get out of that archetype of the football player, right? And the sailor from
Mm-hmm.
Chicago who was 6'4", 260 at one point. So I was named by a couple friends the artist formerly known as Meathead, which really kind of described it. If you knew me, and if you knew me in college, I was just like, this total meathead. But you know, after doing what I did for a couple years, I transformed into this artist, and became a live painter, and that's when it really took off. 2 years after Kansas City, I ended up going to Chicago and painting the likes of Willie Nelson, Blues Traveler, this whole movement of music, which might be called the jam band scene, but it expands a lot more and a lot further than that. But Red Rocks was definitely my studio. So was more so Cervantes, my best buddy from Kansas, University of Kansas, owned a venue with 900 people and at capacity, and he had, I mean, Jay Bianchi, his Scott and Jay were booking bands all the time. So I was actually getting really high on weed and smoking smoking a lot of weed and basically painting to the music
Mm-hmm.
without any idea what I was going to do. It was completely unknown. I would set up a canvas, and then at the end of the night, I would have a painting. And I was in the corner. I had lots of friends. The vibe was amazing. And most of the feedback I got that really kept me going was the musicians and the creatives that were, at the end of the night saying, "Oh my God, that's great." And so that's, what it felt like the longest 5 years in my life, in a way,
Mm-hmm.
because I was painting so much, whether it was a bluegrass band one night or an old blues player the other, or, Warren Haynes one night. I mean, I was getting all sorts of different music. And I had this underlying rule that I was like, whatever, how do you know what to paint? And I said, whatever the music is, I'm painting the visual of the music. So I definitely have a little bit of that synesthesia where if I close my eyes, I can see the music. I've always felt like I had that. I also kind of from MTV have this visualization of the music, meaning if you're telling a story, I can kind of illustrate that, you know what I mean? And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like those are kind of gifts that I had all my
Right.
life. So that is the beginning of the bottoming out of John Bukaty right there, because there was no boundaries, no limits. Um, Everything was peace and love, and I went completely down the wormhole with that, the fact that there was no rules. And that was a
Right.
terrible place to go when you became an alcoholic who actually, I didn't really love cocaine. I just liked the smell of it, as that said,
Mm-hmm.
and so that ended up bottoming me out very quickly in
Okay.
'07. And that point,
Okay.
that was, yeah. And that's kind of when I started doing the
Okay.
corporate scene.
Okay, cool. Let me break in here and share with the listeners your profile. You're a high spontaneous type. So your optimism's over 80, which is spontaneity, experiencing the world. It's very visual as well. Your anger is above 70, which means you're driven. So you got a big engine behind the spontaneity. Your patience is a 2, which means you don't really have any, which makes you very, or what I like to call hyper flexible, able to change gears, switch lanes, without mirrors, just boom. Um, so this fits what you're talking about. You're a very extroverted person, as you talked about, which means it's like you have an empty head until you fill it with music and visualization and experience. Um, like it means if something isn't happening, you're going to get bored really quickly. And so hyper stimulation, works really well for you, John. And when you were talking about when you were watching MTV and sitting very close to the television, you were really stimulating your brain, and your brain uh, likes that high stimulation. And so when something isn't enough, if there's something else that comes in that gives you a better dopamine dump, odds are really good you'll be attracted to that until you're not. And then what gives you a greater dopamine dump? And then you'll be attracted to that until that isn't working. And then what's greater than that? Kind of a process. Um, if that makes sense. So you're just a very um, jump off the cliff and build your wings on the way down. And I like to say about people like you, rehearsing is actually going to work against you than doing things off the cuff in the spare of the moment, which is where you're going to likely be at your best. So people that do improv are like this. They get up there and they start playing off of whatever the audience is saying or doing, and then you can't stop it. It becomes a runaway train. And I think you are like that with your creativity. On the motivational side, you're what I call a hyper creative, which means you're not the average creative person. You're in a hyper zone because you have overextended lines in your creativity. So your aesthetic component is a 90 out of 100. I don't get that very often. Someone that high. Maybe my daughter. But other than that, I don't see 90s at all on average. And you're super high individualism and you're very low efficiency, which means you may end up doing everything the long way and the hard way and the creative way, but because of the experience, it's like taking the long way home because it's a better view. But in the end, you really didn't save any time. But you got lost in the journey. You enjoyed that journey. And so you can get lost in creativity, and it's probably when you're your most creative. Um, but just for starters, that's pretty much your profile. So um, Uh, I want you to talk about you. You ended your statements there with bottoming out, and then entering the corporate realm. What was that bottoming out like? And then how did you transition from that into painting in corporate settings?
So it's a good question. How did I bottom out? I think I was doing the same thing I was doing for 2 years. I just had different results in the sense that it just didn't work anymore. Meaning I was drinking, a lot for many years, but then something
Right.
happened. And then either my brain was pickled, like they say in AA, or something. I remember at one point I had like one drink and I got in a cab, looked at the clock, and it was 10:30. I had only been out for a half hour and I started going, oh man, something's happening. So either the alcoholism was a real thing in my brain. Uh, I was
Mm-hmm.
definitely I knew that I was not right. So that was the beginning
Yeah.
of it. And then the results were like, okay, all of a sudden, super memory loss. I remember smoking a cigarette while I was doing a painting, lit one in my left hand, and all of a sudden I had two in my hand. I went two in one in each hand. I went, okay, I'm losing it. So I definitely was
Mm.
losing my mind, and I
Mm-hmm.
was aware of it. Then I couldn't quit. So I tried to quit drinking. I couldn't quit for like a year. I'm not a year, a month. And I was like, oh man, this is scary. In the middle of this, my
Yeah.
friend had killed himself. In the middle of this, I went through a breakup. I got my van repossessed, my apartment repossessed, or not my apartment, my studio, which I actually had a gallery and then built this cool bed in the back above my painting. So nobody really knew I lived there, uh, except
Mm-hmm.
everybody I knew. So yeah, so that was kind of where it all hit the skids. My dad died right. My dad died December 18th that year in '07, and was I was not going to be at that funeral drunk. And so I quit drinking
Wow.
and it felt really good. So I continued it another
Mm-hmm.
month. I was still on the marijuana maintenance and then got in the program, a program, so to speak, um, within that year. And that's when I started getting really honest and started getting really
Yes.
I was actually very spiritual before that. Uh, just a few
Mm-hmm.
months before that, I started listening to Wayne Dyer, Eckhart Tolle, and I was listening to all these audio CDs that they just started changing my whole world. And that was when
Mm.
I had like a psychic change and really and it was doing the real 12-step program that started making me look at who I was, and and it was not good. I had only looked
Mm.
at the good stuff before,
Mm-hmm.
and then I started looking at the stuff that hurt people, the stuff, the not paying bills, and look. There's a thing in this book that says we knew of ourselves as we thought of ourselves as our intentions, and other people thought of us as our actions, and that made me about throw up because I went, oh my god. I never meant to be late. I never meant to skip the payment. I never meant to do that. The
Right.
reality of my actions, that's what kept me ever wanting to get, drunk or stoned again. And that,
So you were pretty much out of
yeah,
control with a good
yeah, I
heart.
would say so. Yeah, I see a lot of
Yeah.
people like that.
Mm. Yeah. So was this AA you were a part of or something
We're not
else?
supposed to commercialize it, but I mean, I'm pretty open about my anonymity because I help
Right.
people. So if there's one
Mm-hmm.
person on this podcast that goes, "Oh my God, that's my story," then I want to know that part of my service is he could be in contact with me and we could change his life. It,
Right.
so it's
Okay.
attraction, not promotion. But I
I
yeah, but
understand.
the other to answer your question about, how did I get into corporate events? I did a corporate event in '06, I think, and I did a painting. It was a 20th anniversary. Like 180 people got their print. I signed the print, limited edition, framed it. It was a big payday. And, I'd always said I could do that. I ran into Doug Corpenning, who I think you met his wife, Dana, and he said, man, I can sell this in the corporate events. I said, go ahead, do it. So he started. booking me once or twice a year with his event company. And then right about the time I met you, somewhere around 2015 is when this thing started taking off, because people are looking for
Right.
original stuff. But basically, I show up, do a painting, and everybody gets a custom print, signed and numbered, gift wrapped. And that's my business in the corporate events business, which is amazing, because my intention in 1999, when I quit my job, I was like, I'm going to travel the world and get paid doing my art. And everybody laughed at
Mm.
me and, said, I wouldn't bet on it, pal. You're not going to get paid any money doing art. And the universe kind of worked in this realm. I've been all over the world because of this. It's amazing.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. So, you're the example of the people that I say are doing more by accident than some people are trying to do on purpose.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't realize
you
till
know,
I got, till I,
well, your road's been very much a
yeah,
zigzag. Um,
zigzag
but
up and down, stop and go, speed
yeah,
bump, tire blowouts, everything you could possibly imagine.
and what's amazing, John, is no matter how crazy it gets, you keep coming up for air and you keep swimming. Um, where I think there are other people who would be out for the count with some of this in their story. Because I know that happens to some people, but for you, it's almost like you're a weeble. You wobble, but you don't fall down. Um,
I got
you,
knocked on my ass a lot as a
yeah.
I look back and I mean, I had trauma at birth. I had a cracked skull at 6 months old, climbing out of the, you know, uh, baby chair, high chair, whatever. I was sexually abused at 11 years old. I had to overcome so much stuff.
Oh my
I
God.
also feel like that whatever happened in that whole time period, I was kicked out of school in third grade. I was kicked out of high school. Was a behavior issue. I got in fights and car wrecks and all that. Looking back on all that, there was some kind of what I call a gift now. Is there was a resilience that was kind of either built in, or my parents just basically did wonders for me to get me back up on my feet and shake it back off. So
Hmm.
I quit every day. I think I think there's a point, and almost 3-4 times a week, where I go, oh my God, I'm never doing, I quit. This isn't
Hmm.
working. And that leads me to a phone call, or a meditation or something else. And I a couple months ago, I just went to my sponsor and I said, okay, I just found out the problem with John Bukaty, the business. It's
Hmm.
me. I need to fire me. How do I
Hmm.
do that? And I'm going to go get a job. And he went, well, nobody's going to hire you, because you're you're going to do your own thing, and no, you're not going to abide by anybody's rules. So get that out of your head right away, and then just kind
Hmm.
of get back in there. I mean, so yeah, I get frustrated beyond belief, but i have this I have this resilience that is, like, there's no quitting. What am I going to
Yeah.
do? What
Well,
else am
let
I
me
going to
let me just say something about you, John. In my experience with you, when you are up against the wall, or when you want to quit, or when you face a real hellish trial, you reach out. I know you've reached out to me several times. I mean, I'll just get a call out of the blue, no appointment, no nothing. I just see your name in the phone, and if I'm not doing anything, I answer it, obviously, because I'm a friend
right?
of yours. And you just say, "Hey, I'm screwed up." I
Yeah,
mean, you're so brutally honest. You have no secrets. And somebody once told me, "You're only as free as your secrets."
yeah, you're only
And
good.
you just have a way of being able to face your own music. And when you do and you reach out, you tend to overcome in that moment. You're one of those rare people who refuses to let themselves down. Um, and I find it fascinating. I find it amazing. And I find you uh, a great role model and example for being off your rocker, knowing it, and reaching out when you're too far away from safety zones. And I think that's part of your secret sauce is your brutal, excruciating honesty with yourself, with other people. There's no pretense with you. I mean, some people, you see the people you're introduced to and you see the person you're talking to, but that's not the person you're talking to. With you, you'll know in 5 minutes that I'm talking to John Bukaty in his raw form. And I think that's what everybody who knows you loves about you.
Yeah,
It's what I love about you.
thank you.
And I think, for our listeners, um, one of the greatest gifts you can have is self-understanding and self-honesty. And a lot of the friends that have known me over the years have basically told me the same thing about myself. Your greatest gift is the fact that you're teachable, and when you make a mistake, you don't mind talking about it. Matter of fact, when I was in my 20s, I talked about my failures so much, somebody took me aside and told me privately when I was speaking to a group of people, you may want to be careful about what you say about yourself. Nobody's going to respect you. And I remember looking at him and saying, no, that's why they do respect me.
Yeah. I think Brene Brown proved that wrong, right? When
Absolutely.
the whole thing shifted when you actually become vulnerable. And so when
Absolutely.
you wall up with me, I mean, I know it's natural, but I'm not trying to nudge them. I just know that the one thing that always comes back to me is that, man, I got to remember that, and you too, we have the reinforcement of knowing that when you take that leap of faith, it works.
Mm-hmm.
We, you know, when I got into, studying my codependence, I didn't want to, but I knew the results would work, and in the program, we talk a lot about rigorous honesty, and
Mm-hmm.
people don't want to hear that, and they just don't. But yeah, I definitely love Brene Brown and the way she is, changing the language around the workforce. And
Mm-hmm.
her latest book really got me. And there's a little bit of program in that as well as having the wherewithal or the place to talk honest with your employees, which I'll segue into what I've been really coincidentally, you have been mentioning it on social media about how important trust is.
Mm-hmm.
The more I keep getting into that or looking into it, it's unbelievable how the ripple effect in that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, man.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, trust is hard to do um, because to the degree that you are able to trust will be to the degree that you have to become more vulnerable,
Right.
because there are plenty of people out there that can take advantage of you. Or, when we go to the supermarket and we're at the cash register and we're talking to somebody, there is no risk in that conversation. But when you're calling me on the phone and you're telling me about something that happened to you or something you failed to do or where you messed up, there's great risk there to share our vulnerable points in places. And I truly believe to the degree that you will able to be vulnerable will be to the degree that you'll able to trust people. And when you're trusting the right people, then there's a lot to be gained in a relationship like that, whether it's a partnership in life or a partnership in business or something like that. But trust is huge. And, Brene Brown calls it excruciating vulnerability because it is excruciating. But once you get over the hump of realizing you're not perfect and neither is anybody else, it's not too bad.
Yeah, it is.
So I want to mention also, I've got your HVP scores. So the HVP is the Hartman Value Profile.
Okay.
And we're measuring your perception of the world around you, which includes people, things, and ideas. Your clarity levels are excellent. You've got very clear clarity all around, and you have balanced judgment, which means no matter what you're looking at, John, you see the upside and the downside equally. Sometimes if we're seeing too much of the upside, we don't see the downside, we can be taken advantage of. And this can be with anything. And so you've got just you got a real you have might sound crazy to you, I think, but you have a very good decision making capacity. Now, a couple cute little things I'm seeing here. There are compositions and there are transpositions when it comes to how we view the world and what we value. So transpositions have to do with bad things and compositions have to do with good things. So what it would be a bad thing about how things ought to be? Well, a bad thing about how things ought to be would be, we don't have to be that consistent. We don't have to be that accurate, that kind of a thing. So what happens with you is you have, when it comes to how things ought to be, this is where we would measure perfection. You overvalue, logical clarity and consistency. So you're really trying to be consistent and things like that. And then you undervalue the bad things about being consistent. And what that means is your brain says, in certain instances, it's okay to break the rules and to be inconsistent. But you average it out. So it creates 6 solutions and 6 problems. So those are equal numbers, which is good because what happens is every situation depends on itself. So if you're in a situation where being too perfectionist is going to hurt you, you won't do it. And if you're in a situation where being a little more perfect is going to work for you, you're able to do it. And a lot of people are one or the other. And so when one's working, it's working. When it isn't, it's not. With you, you have options. It can work or not work, and it's really up to you. And so these, I'm just telling you, are really, really good scores because you have a very balanced view of the world. Now, yeah. And so your self-esteem score, not super great. So you pay more attention to where you need improvement than you do with where you don't. And so I'm measuring this in a numeric value. So you overvalue yourself by 2, but you undervalue yourself by 10. And
That's
so,
been a work in progress this year.
yeah, that's a work in progress.
That's actually basically Al-Anon in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
Is I'm not good enough and I'm going to control other things to make up for it. So I'll tell you, man, doing that 12-step work in Al-Anon this year was life-changing because I did this whole thing on self-esteem and I thought I was like a D plus, and I get to the end of it and I'm kind of like I'm going to put it in layman's terms, like A minus, or, very good person. I do all this stuff. And, I definitely have struggles with money and food. Those are real.
Mm-hmm.
And that, but to share your point, so to speak, is like, that is something I'm working on right now. But to go, there was a thing that I did this year. I did a 3-day silent retreat, and I worked with this guy, Tim Vanderkamp, who really, we really tried to unlock the why, and I found it, and it was there all the time. And I love that idea, finding your why. And then, but what I really got, and I still have it, is like all year people are like, what's been, how's it going? I'm like, it's good and terrible. And they're like, which one? I'm like, good and terrible at the same time. It kind of feels like everything is I've kind of broken the illusion of like, okay, things have been great for 10 days. I'm going to figure out how to do this the rest of my life. And then something bad happens, not to me, it just happens. And then I go, oh man,
Yeah.
I was on such a hot streak. Now I'm kind of living that balance, and people don't always want to hear it. I mean, and I don't always say it, but that is the truth. I mean, almost everything that happens good, there's a reaction, possibly negative, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
And all the major things that have ever happened to me in my life, there was a negative. Like when I quit my job, I was suicidal, and I lost what was going to be $100,000 a year and took a pay cut. But
Mm-hmm.
the benefits were I got to become kind of a self-actualized artist, you
Right.
know, and that trend and the major shifts in my life, they all have that, because I just did kind of a reflection of being an artist for 20 years, and that was the constant theme. In hindsight, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
see it.
Yeah. Well, another good thing about your score is you're 100% committed to your future, even though you're not fully clear on what that is. And what that means is whatever you think about who you are not, you're very committed to who you're becoming. And that's a real positive point. That's a very, I'm measuring your positive. So when it comes to your future, you overvalue your future to the tune of 12 and you undervalue it to the tune of 0. So you are 100% committed and 100% positive about the man you're becoming, even though you may be experiencing some trepidation about the man you are. You're fully committed to the person you're becoming, which is really powerful. So when you get scores this way, your future outlook is good and positive and up and away rather than down, down and out. And so you're like a bottle rocket. When you were a kid and you put a bottle rocket in a bottle and you lit it at the beach, everybody had to run for cover because we didn't know where it was going to go. We just knew it was coming out of that bottle. And you are sort of like a bottle rocket. You got a lot of energy, you got a lot of fire behind you, but you're chaotically going through the sky. We just know it's up and away, and then we don't know where it's going to go. And so I think there could be, if you can embrace that, which I think you have in a large part, you can embrace that, the parts of that work really well for you. And then the other parts where you might end up inconsistency or forgetful or whatever, you just put some safeguards in place, people to call, things like that, which I think you've done. Then, it's okay. And then as time goes on and you start looking back in hindsight, you're like, wow, here's where I was. Now look at where I am. And likely you can expect that for your future as well. And that's what I tend to see with graphs like this. The future tends to be bright, although unpredictable.
Mm-hmm. Well, have you heard of Joe Dispenza, the guy who's talking about like real extreme meditations lately? He's popping up everywhere.
I have not.
He's trying. He tries to tell you to carve out space for the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're just going to repeat the old habits that you do,
Mm-hmm.
by not giving it the space. And that has been. I've been doing a lot of his meditations these last, 4 or 5 weeks, and I've definitely seen some differences. And it's more of a mind. It's more of a focused meditation, because I think meditation is such a broad term. I can do it to lay down and relax. I can do it to focus. I can do it to, visualize. I mean, it's such a big spectrum. Just like I believe trauma, the word trauma, now that people think it's overused, I just think it's a broad term of what, is underneath a lot of behavior,
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
anyway,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the thing about you, John, is, um, you could take "I'll try anything once" as a negative, and it does have its negatives if those things you're trying aren't in your best interest. But when you say "I'll try anything once" and they are in your best interest, then you have a leg up. And I see you as that kind of a person. I think nearly every time I talk to you, there's something else you've discovered that's out there, and you're trying it to better understand yourself, to better get a grip on yourself, to better, whatever you want to call it. You just are always working. You're always moving ahead. You're trying different things to see what sticks. And then when you find something, you lean on it. And I think that's really great, that you're an experimenter. I guess that's the best thing to call it. When
Right.
you have high aesthetic notions, which is a high level of creativity with strong curiosity elements. And those are the people that will do psilocybin.
Right.
And I had an MDMA experience not too long ago,
Right.
just trying to get to the bottom of some of my insecurities I've had over the years. Um,
Yeah,
and it was a positive experience. I got a little scared. I was in bed the next day, all day, calling up the practitioner, like, "Is this okay? My teeth are chattering." He's like, "No, that's normal."
right.
I'm like, "Okay, I'm getting a little nervous here." Um, but anyway, years ago, I would have mocked or scoffed or condemned anybody who would seek any means of discovering themselves other than whatever I thought was the right way. But anyway, and my theoretical line is extremely high. It's like a 98. So my curiosity levels are extremely high. Although my aesthetic levels are not super high. And so anyway, point being made here.
Say your aesthetic levels. What are you talking about?
So my creativity levels are really not that high. And so
Remember when you told me you drew this horse that was photorealistic when you
yes.
and I remember this is the first time we talked. I literally could see it the way you described it. I can even remember where we were when we were talking, and I went, "Okay, let me ask you a question. Could you do that without looking at that picture?" And you went, "Oh God, no." And I said, "Could you just draw something out of the blue?" And you went, "Oh no, no, not doesn't even register." So
Right.
that was kind of where I remember, getting to know you better, but also knowing that it didn't. That's what it just didn't click like that for
Yeah,
you.
my artwork was photorealistic, but without a photograph, it was awful.
Right.
Yeah, couldn't do it. But when I had a photograph to look at, 10 feet away, you wouldn't know the difference. So I had school teachers buying my artwork from me. And when I was in 11th grade, I was winning contests, but I couldn't draw without a picture in front of me.
Well, I think it's a balance. I think, it's, creating your own content through creativity and then executing it, whether it's realistic or not, it's going to be judged on how it makes people
You know
feel.
what? That's the part I missed. I never got that memo. I thought if it didn't look good, I was worthless. I think that's how, and when I was young, I viewed my art. So I was so meticulous about every whisker on a cat and every hair on a cat. I drew these Siamese cats for my mom for Christmas. It took me like 14 hours, just drawing the hair. And because if it wasn't perfect, I wasn't perfect. Um, and I think I leaned on my art as a security blanket for feeling like I was good at something. So to have something that's just creative and spontaneous, where some people like it, some people don't, I guess in my mind, that wasn't good enough.
Gotcha.
And it's almost like I lost the art. Here's what's weird. I was watching Bob Ross on Amazon Prime the other day, and doing the happy trees and all that. And I had this hankering to go buy a canvas and just go back to those days and start experimenting with a new view. Like it's okay if it's not perfect, right? To see what happens. And I think that's in my future.
Yeah, and I think it feels like it feels good. He's obviously getting people. He's attracting it because he obviously was ahead of his time, but
Yeah.
he was also it's soothing. And
Yeah.
then
He was a freaking therapist.
he was also a good buddy of Jerry Garcia, and so he's definitely a deep, like
Yeah.
deep creative person.
Oh, absolutely.
He was not taken serious for so many years,
Yes.
and now he just like Mr. Rogers. Now we're like putting, now we're looking at him like, okay, wait a minute, maybe these guys knew something we didn't.
Yeah. Well, I went on eBay and looked at his original paintings are between 17 and $30,000. Just unbelievable. And so to watch him do it, just so simple, so relaxed, so kind to himself. He goes, mistakes are good. He goes, what the heck? Let's put another tree in here.
I'm not kidding. When you talk about my process, I'm literally going to the music. Sometimes I don't know when I learned this, but if you don't like it, just paint over it. I would paint 2 or 3 things till I got them right. And I didn't, and sometimes I painted over the good one, but I didn't I was doing that all in one motion. So I am making decisions on that. But in the meantime, I'm making, I'm making tons of mistakes.
Right.
If you study The Artist's Way, she talks about all the problem with people is they want a final book without doing any rough drafts. So they're writing this book and thinking, and that's like, don't think, right.
Right.
And, so, if you can accept your rough draft to look just terrible with marks all over it and circles and crosses out, obviously not the teacher's red marker because that offends you, but your own rewrites, right? Like the great writers say, it's not how much you write, it's how you rewrite, right? And get it. That's really hard for me as a writer, not as a painter. But one of the other things I think that people just don't understand is not only does it take experience, you have to be terrible at first, it's just part of the deal.
Yeah.
And thank God I had been terrible my whole life, because when I was terrible, my live paintings in front of people, man, it took a couple vodkas till they looked good, So then in the morning I'd be like, oh God, they're terrible again. But I showed up the next Thursday, I finished it, and I had changed my process. But there's a good saying that me and my buddy always say. It's a recovery term, but you can't think your way into right action.
Yeah.
You can
I remember I've written 8 books now. And the first time I wrote something, which I would consider maybe like an article, this is in 2006, 5 or 6. I passed it on to a friend, said, hey man, would you check this out? Tell me what you think. And he looked at it and got back to me a little while later. And I said, hey, did you read what I wrote? He goes, yeah, stick to speaking. I mean, it was horrible.
Did it motivate you to write more, or did it motivate you?
It motivated me.
Yeah, me too.
I wrote more. And I tried to write a book 3 or 4 times and would get pages and pages in and then quit. I took 2 years of writing school online with the Institute of Children's Literature out of Connecticut, and passed that course. I had a legitimate, editor and everything. All my work would come back all red ink, they would just tighten the writing for me and tell me, I learned a lot through doing it wrong for so long. Anyway, so, I don't think I'm a great writer at all. I think I'm okay, but I love the process. I love getting my thoughts out of my head and onto paper. and onto print. I love doing that. I don't write for a living. I write because I enjoy doing it. I consult for a living, but it's been really good for me. Really, really good for me. But anyway, yeah. So,
You know that you just put on Facebook the other day about reading and people reading?
yes.
Where, I mean, where do you think with that stat, what is that a result of where things are going or what people are
Well,
short of?
I think
What?
there's two prongs to that. I think reading is like a lot of people might be listening to a book as opposed to reading a book, which is just an auditory rather than a visual process of taking in the information. That could be part of that. With the, you know, with the new electronic age with tablets and things like that, and people are, where are they reading? They're reading Twitter tweets, they're reading Instagram. So when I think to pick up a book is for what's happening to our brains today, to pick up a book and look at it, you're going to feel like you need to fall asleep in 2 minutes because it's not stimulating like a screen does. Um, and
Right.
and I think, you know, a lot of people are spending their time gaming in the younger groups. They're doing a lot of gaming. I know some people game 8 to 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
Young people are on their phones almost upwards to 5 hours and more. So time for books. Books. I think it's almost like brains have moved beyond books. When I get a book, I buy the audio book and I also buy the print book.
Oh, nice.
And when I do the print book, I underline and highlight and study. And when I do the audio book, I close my eyes and listen.
Well, that's why I'm not retaining it.
Pardon me?
I mean, that's why I don't retain my audiobooks as well, is because I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I have to do that if I want to retain it. I have to take out the print book. I write in it in the margins. I underline things. I put stars next to important things. I go back, I reference it. And then I find that it sticks with me longer. But to just listen, that's really great, but I couldn't repeat it to you 20 minutes later if I've heard it for the first time. So as I've gotten older, it's harder to memorize. When I was young, I did a lot of Bible reading,
Right.
and I had full chapters. I can still quote them to memory.
You can. Or did you read them 7 times, or what was?
I would read them, and then I would write out the entire chapter on paper,
right,
by hand, over and over and over again. I would write verses that I wanted to memorize hundreds of times. So if with my hand and a pen.
With somebody else's book, you probably would do the same thing, huh?
Yeah.
Because I'm seeing my kids in their memory, and I'm wondering how they have these amazing memories. Well, they're doing a lot of the same things too. They're reading it, rewatching it, and I'd like to say they have just a more fresh, hard drive than I do.
Yeah, well, I'll listen to books that I find really powerful with great information, 10 times.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I also read them on paper. Like right now, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 8 books open on my desk. My desk is really big, but I have 8 books face up open on the desk, and all of them are covered in yellow and black ink. And what'll happen is I'll get an idea and I'll grab that particular book and I'll read a little more. And then but I can't read a book because I end up studying it.
Right.
I have to listen to a book to get through it, because if I'm reading a book, I'll never finish it because all I do is study. Then I take that information, I go online and research it even more. And then I get sucked down the vortex of what somebody else thinks about it and what they're saying. Then I might abandon an idea because I've researched it to the point of realizing it's not as true as I would like it to be. And then I have to abandon it. I have to give it up.
Right.
Things like that. So I just end up on this constant carousel of learning and relearning and dismantling, dumping and then gaining, knowledge every day. Um, and so it can be frustrating because when I'm working with people or talking, a thought comes to me, but it's incomplete because I've got 8 books going at the same time. So that's part of my attention deficit.
Right.
But it does work for me in other areas really, really well. And then in things like this, it's very scattered and choppy. But because I love learning so much, it is what it is. So anyway, how do people find you in your artwork?
It's johnbukaty.com, JOHNBUKATY.com.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much my, home base. You can email,
Okay, cool.
call me. I have a team of people that keep me in check. And I have a guy who books me on corporate events.
Okay, great. You tell me what are your hopes and aspirations for 2020 right now? Are they similar to what you've been doing, or do you got anything coming up that you're going to try new or anything like that?
Well, to be honest, I tried that project in June, 500 random acts of art in 50 days,
Oh
which
my.
probably the most what do you call it? Like, oh God. If I don't think of this word, I'm gonna die because it's anyway, I'm gonna have to go back to it. But just the most ambitious project I ever tried. It was just trying to make art, anything into art at any given moment, and that
Mm,
fed my spontaneity. Where it didn't really work was I was on the road, the logistics, and when you're trying to plan a trip, and one of the main components was be free and spontaneous. It's hard to get pre-sold paintings in Montana when you're like try it created a lot of disconnection, right? And I
right.
liked that at the beginning, and then got real sick of myself real soon, not having any plans. And
Yeah.
it really should have been a studio thing rather
Hmm.
than a kind of you know having to deal with all the hotels and everything. But that being said, after I really think that was if you talk about range or expanding a universe or whatever you want to talk about, I kind of feel like I hit my brick wall on that one. I said, okay, I'm done with that. I'm actually going to move towards quality, move towards making better decisions, not so spontaneous on the business level. Because I can be spontaneous all I want in a notebook or a sketchbook. I don't have to bet my business every 3 months on
Right.
myself, and so I feel like I pulled way back on that, and I'm kind of trying. I've hired this new person. She's amazing, way overqualified, but wants to do the work, and
Hmm.
um, that's going to give me so much bandwidth. But what I'm pretty much doing in 2020, I'm already booked on 5 events. I'm
Oh,
going to
nice.
try to do what I do a lot better. And then I think I'm going
Excellent.
to bring the quality into the work, which would be the opposite of 500 random acts. It would be switching gears to, okay, what are you doing good now? But I really think where the spontaneity, whatever the hell the word is, where it really works well for me and is setting up a situation where I can still be, like you said, be authentic. Don't talk about shit you don't know what you're talking about. People will see right through you. And I
Yeah.
went, oh man, well, that's all I really want to talk about is my new book or whatever, or my new thing. And so at those conferences or the things where I speak, I follow that rule, and I love that rule. And I find where I'm most exciting and most authentic is when I'm getting questions asked to me. And I think you do too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
When
Yeah.
you see all the all the neurotransmitters kind of click, and it excites me. And hopefully it's a good question, but that is where I'm going in 2020. I'm looking for this. What is success? Write it out, draw it out, put the balance in, put the hours in, you know, put the finance in, do the whole wheel or whatever, the eight thing wheel, then try to follow that. And so I'm in the process of doing that. Whereas I think in the past, I listened to a lot of Gary Vee and a lot of Tony Robbins. I didn't listen to a lot of Tony Robbins. I'm just saying those kind of like go, 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 live life to the fullest and do everything as much as you can. Well, those days, that's horseshit to me now. Thanks to
Yep.
experience,
We see what's wonderful, John, is you tried it, you know what works, you know what doesn't. And I think intentionality, it sounds like, is what your future's holding rather than spontaneity. Because when you're intentional and you're talking and doing things you do well, then yeah, you'll do more in a short amount of time than you will in a long amount of time. And so the fact that you learned a lot through that process is really great, because now I love what you just said. You got sick of yourself.
Right. Well,
you just realized this isn't working for me, so we're not going to do this.
Well, and I hate the whole idea. And I taught one of my good buddies is Anders Osborne. He's an unbelievable singer-songwriter, and I represent his art too. He does several kinds of visual art, and it is moving through him. But when we talk a lot, we've already created the monster, which has the same name of us. I'm John Bukaty, but I'm the artist, and that isn't who I am anymore. I've kind of like outgrown that, but I have to know that it's a business, and it is self-absorbed. It is somewhat like narcissistic to sit there and say, "Hey, look at me," and but it's also like what I think there's an artist. I can't remember who it was who said, but being an artist is like one spectrum of just saying, "Oh my God, look at what I've created. Please look at this amazing thing." And then at the same very moment, you're in the corner, like hidden and like completely shy and embarrassed. And it's both of those at the same time, As
Yeah.
if you listen to like Susan Tedeschi where she sings and you're like, "Oh my God," it brings tears to your eyes. And then it's deep and it's soulful. And then at the end of the song, she's like, "Oh, thank you very much." And it's like, wait, who was that? Like you let the artist come through you, And I think I try to work on that because look, man, if you analyzed it, who has influenced me as artist? I mean, my friend Don, my friend Scramble, Frenchie, all these guys have a huge influence on what I was doing early on. And that doesn't even count like the influence that Jim Morrison had on me when I was in high school, what Bob Marley had on me, and, just reading through books and books because I couldn't read. I just looked at the pictures. So, I mean, I would look at Picasso books and I would look at all these pictures. They're still in my head, but so seriously, how the hell can you give me credit for anything when I am, 2,500 deep that people have influenced me with, So that is all ego. And unfortunately, I still have to sell myself as a name because they need to remember who it is and all the stuff that comes with business. And damn right, I've sold out a lot of times, I got paid to go to the Vatican to paint a corporate event and they wanted to know what I was painting, so I gave them a sketch and they were part of the process. So like not everybody can be Neil Young, but I'll tell you what, when I've let go, and they say let go and let God. When I've kind of let go and let the universe, unbelievable things happen, because my visualization of traveling the planet doing art was in a van and it was selling art when I got back, and not, and the universe kind of had a better idea for me. It said, look, why don't you paint in front of people, and then we'll take you and put you in the nicest hotels in America and all over the world. So
Mm.
who, when I leave it up to other people and trust them, I get unbelievable opportunities. It's amazing. I painted on billboards in NFL stadiums and concerts with over 100,000 people, and I mean, maybe not 100,000, but 70,000, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
500,000 over the whole week and stuff like that. That is all because other people trusted me and I trusted them, and I gave a little bit, you know what I mean? Give and take.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had to give and take a little bit. Look, on all the music stuff, I'm not painting a preconceived thing. I'm trying to actually turn their music into color, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that right there is giving them the control. Literally, like half the time they stop playing in between songs, my arm like falls down because it's going right to the beat. So that's completely dependent on the music. So
Yeah.
I'm just a super small player in the game. But if you take me out of it, the whole thing does collapse, right?
Mm.
So you know what I mean?
Yep. Well, John, great stuff. I really appreciate you taking the time to, come on the show with me and share your life story and what you do in the world. So all you listeners, johnbukaty.com, take a look at his art. You see something you like, buy it. John, one of my favorite things is that piano, the guy playing the piano that you did. And that piano kind of goes off, the keyboard. You know which one I'm talking about?
Yes.
It's fabulous. But just that whole thing, it just speaks volumes, just looking at those visuals. So take a look at his art. And so, well, John, thanks again, buddy.
Thank you, man.
Appreciate your story and your friendship.
Oh, I appreciate it. Lots of love to you, man.
Okay.
You have really been helpful in helping me understand who I am, man. And I appreciate that from the
Awesome.
bottom. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.